Alright, so we're going to get this caliper bracket, new pads, and all this stuff on. The brake rotor's already been resurfaced, so that side is done. This is more about what to do with the pads. So first things first, we're going to pop these little shims off. These little shims are clips. A good one will come with new ones. This one didn't. So the next thing is, this rust here building up is going to cause a tightness in the pad. So if it's too built up there, the pad will actually drag, it won't release, it'll cause premature wear. So we're going to do some little work on it. You can see this is just some surface rust. It's not really going to take much. I'm going to run a file over it. Just try to hold the file nice and straight. It's going to take pretty minimal work. A little bit on the edge here. Same. And then our trusty wire brush. Brush our teeth. And we're just gonna clean it up, and that's gonna free our space up. So boom, just like that. Now, because we're reusing these, we're gonna clean these up as well. And it's mostly cleaning just a little rust and a little dust and some debris. The backs were fairly clean, but it's just, it takes a few minutes, but it does make a big difference on how long the brake pads last. Professionally, we gotta do this stuff. Do it yourself, you do whatever the heck you want. So, this stuff is officially prepped. Now there's some debate. Some people would like to put some grease back here because it's going to kind of waterproof it, but we're just going to go by manufacturer recommendations. It doesn't call for it. So these clips are the same. We just need to basically fit the clip. Now that's not going to work because the brake pad's going to hit. So we'd say, oh, okay, whoops, got it upside down. And we just basically will fit it in there. It fits pretty good. If it's loose and falling all over the place, you're going to have to find new ones, whether it's a hardware kit or whatever you got to do to find some new ones. So we just go ahead, we pop them in there. Now our next step, I actually have to go get some lubricant, and we're sharing it with another group right now, so we're going to hold one second. So we've got some very specific brake lube. It's ceramic extreme. This contains no petroleum products, and the petroleum products would potentially cause seals to swell. So pop these pins out, and they're like, oh, they're stuck. We'll kind of grab it by the rubber here, pop it out. Deep inside the caliper bracket, there's probably a seal or an O-ring, so that's why you don't want to use a petroleum grease like a regular wheel bearing grease or anything. Just gonna paint that up real quick, pop it in, push it until the boot pops on. See that? We kind of help it out. Now it's nice and watertight. Same on this one. Boom, quick, bang, bang, bang. Pump it in there. Now these should move nice and free. And they do. So I say that's a success. Now the next part, we need to grease these little contact points. Here and here, because that's where the pad is going to end up contacting. We don't want metal to metal. But what I've found, if you take time to grease these and then bring it over and try to put it on here, you can have grease all over the rotor. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this caliper bracket, I'm going to bring my bolts with me, and we're going to just go ahead and install her. So a couple tricks. I'm here, I'm fighting, the rotor's kind of like messing me up, so I'm not going to mess with that. Take a lug nut, and spin it up, in this case backwards. Boom. And now at least the rotor's on there, and it's not going to be like getting crooked and kind of messing me up. So just sometimes you work smarter, not harder kind of thing. So we're going to go ahead and just pop this bracket on real quick. Of course, you may be working in the driveway with no lift, so it may be a little bit more challenging, but we'll just buzz this up. And basically, I'm just going to run the bolts in the back. We're going to look up the torque spec, and we'll resume in 1 second. Pause. All right, so I got that bracket is started, and right now I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to set this torque wrench to 80 foot-pounds. And that's it. So let's come back to the bracket. There's a couple bolts, pretty logically. You know, we're just running it up. I'm going to kind of get both of them. Both of them are already well started. I'm just going to kind of lightly snug them. And then we will one more. They're pretty tight actually. 80 foot-pounds is kind of a lot. Go a little bit more on this one here. Both are torqued. Now, to be polite, go ahead and I'm going to spin the torque wrench down so it's zeroed out and put it away nicely. Boom, and that one's done. Now, next step. Bracket's on. Rotor's kind of held. Let's go for those pads. Now, you need to keep track of which pad is inner and outer, whether they have squealers, whether they have any kind of attachments. These ones are very basic, but I can show you a set that has them. Tony's set comes with the different shims or the plates, comes with a specific grease. You can see that this pad has a little squealer that's attached. Note this pad actually is the outboard side. You can note by the wear, whereas this pad is the inboard side. This is the piston on the inboard side of the caliper, whereas this is just the mark from the outboard side of the caliper where there's no piston. So we kind of lay them, make sure that our new pads match up. We're going to say, okay, how about we set this one up for the outside? We go ahead, we put our little squealer, right? Which this is a squealer, but it's also anti-rattle. It has that spring action. So that one's going to be our outboard pad. This one's going to be our inboard. Now we looked very carefully to see if there's any difference in these humps or any difference on the back, or sometimes there's a little peg or a stud. So just lay your old pads out, get your new pads, line them up exactly the way that they're going to go and make sure they're perfect. So these pads are now set up. So what we would do, it may come with a special grease, or it may come with the other type of grease. We're going to tear it open and we're just going to lightly lubricate the contact points. Those contact points are going to end up riding in this clip right here. So rather than having that metal to metal contact that you can see, which may cause the pad to kind of drag and wear the lining out, the lubrication is going to help it, more naturally release. There's not a whole lot of pressure on the system that caused the pad to release. And so we're going to go ahead and set that up, and then we'll come right back. Okay, so here are our brake pads on this vehicle. They're always a little bit different. This is the inboard one. It's got a nice squealer, but note that inboard pad is riveted. This inboard squealer, I should say. We can't remove that. The new pad doesn't come with any squealer, aka the wear indicator. So we're looking at this, we're thinking, oh, maybe we need to change this over, but that's actually why this has this backing. It's an anti-rattle shim. So this is going to stay, and there's nothing to get swapped over. These are pretty much ready to go. This is what I recommend. Because this was the inboard one as matched up, we're just going to do just a little bit of grease on the contact points. No grease on the lining. A little bit of grease, and I'm talking just a little, as you saw. And again, just a little. And just as a reminder, yes, this is specific grease for this purpose. And at that point, I'm going to say good. This being the outboard, this one being the inboard. Inboard, we're just going to go ahead, slide it in. That one's tough to see. We'll mess more with the outboard. The technique that I see is kind of like you get it pulled here, and then you're going to have to kind of go in at an angle and sort of kick it in. So we sort of got the inner part at an angle, we kick the backside in, and there they are. They're sitting there nice and good. Now this is the point where it would seem easy, but you could have some trouble. So I am ready to reinstall the caliper, which was hung, not by the hose. but as you can see, the piston's pretty extended. There's not enough room for the caliper. So our next step is we're actually going to have to retract that piston. So I'm going to just go ahead and hang the caliper up just a moment while we look at some of the tool options we've got. So option 1, disc brake pad piston compressor. Basically we set it up and you pump and that's going to spread it out. Okay, here's the problem. That's not how this system works. This is a system that has a rear parking brake. This would be great for the front or some rear. This is the tool we're going to have to use. Each one of these little pegs is for different types of calipers. So in this case, we bring it over. You could probably see right there, and we're going to pick which side of the cube engages that caliper piston. And that one was, ooh, look at that, it's perfect right there, first guess. Now I noticed this boot's a little twisted, so what I'm going to do is, just as a little preventative, I'm going to come over here and kind of lubricate it so hopefully it doesn't continue to twist the boot. I need to put an extension in here and get a ratchet to twist this. So we're going to do that, come right back. Alright, so we've got our cube here, the tesseract we call, and an extension of the ratchet, but here's what you gotta watch. I'm just gonna get ready to go all crazy, and as I turn this, note that boot. If you look really close, that boot, maybe some backlight, there you go, good job. That boot, as I turn, is like getting twisted and all sorts of messed up. So I already sprayed it a little bit with some WD-40, but I may have to help it out a little, help it kind of break loose. On the bottom side, it's fixed in the caliper. On the top side, the piston should be able to rotate and kind of like release the boot. So I'm gonna be patient, so that way I don't end up having to buy a caliper, or, you know, if I tear the boot, I don't have to just like pretend I didn't and lie about it. So I'm gonna try to work it out right now. Okay, seems like it's kind of starting to let go a little bit. I'm gonna try moving it a little bit more. Okay, come on, let go. Okay, so I think that was the first sign of that thing wanting to let go. So you can see now it's still a little wadded up, but the piston is at least turning and the boot is staying still. So when we're done, we can kind of straighten it out. But at least this way, I'm not literally going to shred it. Now I'm turning clockwise. And I'm going to back it up just a hair, just to kind of relax the boot a little. I'm turning clockwise, at least on this vehicle. There may be some oddball ones you have to turn counterclockwise to turn this in. I'm pushing down, but most of my effort is going towards turning clockwise. And you'll notice it's slowly but surely bottoming the caliper. Lots of different tools for this. Nicer tools than this, that's for sure, but it's pretty cheap. Does the job, puts more money in my pocket and less in my toolbox, which, you know, it's kind of good. So I'm going to go a little further, and then as I remember, I believe one of these notches has to be like what I would consider at 6 o'clock, because it's going to engage a pin like that little tab, like that little dowel looking thing on the back side. So I actually overshot it slightly, so rather than back it up, I'm just going to go forward more, you know, clockwise more, until I get it at 6. So I got to go just a little further, and I'm going to say pretty darn close to 6. And then at this point I could kind of just, you know, neaten the boot up a little bit. And because I sprayed some WD-40, it'll be a nice fella. You need the grease back? Yeah, sure. You need to go for it. So I'm going to spray a little brake cleaner or similar equivalent just to get that WD-40 kind of stuff out there. Now, this particular vehicle, we looked up the specs. It actually calls for some grease here, here, and on the back pad, a circle where the piston goes. I think its real story is it's going to basically try to insulate any vibration and vibration becomes squeaking. So if you don't want squeaking, don't buy cheap aftermarket pads, but if it's too late for that, go ahead and grease it where it calls for it. So I'm going to go ahead, move this caliper. Look at that, it goes on nice and easy. I'm just going to work these pins so that it'll line up really well and kind of engage the caliper here. And at that point, boom, we're there. I'm going to get rid of my hanger. We're going to find those bolts I'm looking for, which might be right behind you, and they are. And we're going to go ahead, these bolts are a whole different story than those caliper bolts. Those caliper brackets are 80 foot-pounds. These are something more like 20 to 30. And so I'm just going to spin them up. Spin them up, spin them up, spin them up, spin them up. I'm going to go ahead and get this view right here of this pin. So this pin, as you can see, is engaging a spot here. So we want to make sure that the pin is dropped into that spot. If it's not, it's going to be all kinds of bound up and messed up. That's going to stop the pin from spinning. So when we go ahead and tighten this, it's going to be pretty easy. That pin's not going to really spin a whole lot. So I'm going to get the torque wrench set up and we'll final torque these couple. Yeah, we're making training. All right, so we got these bolts run in, and we looked up the spec in this vehicle. 28 foot-pounds. We've already set our torque wrench. I'm just snugging one. The other one needs to go in a little more before it's even close to snug, so let's go ahead and do that. Never said we're doing it the fast way. We're doing it thorough. This is the way. We don't know how to do it. So we're just going to go ahead and we'll go for the real torque on this one. 28. 28. Now, if you look, this brake job is essentially completed. It's got rotor resurfaced, new brake pads, properly lubed, pins are serviced, clips would have been changed except they don't come with them, so again, we cleaned it up, and we're pretty much ready right now to hop in this car, pump the brake pedal so that this caliper touches. The first time you hit the brakes, you're not going to have a pedal. It's going to drop to the floor to take up the space until it contacts. Then you get your pedal. The next step, we're going to drive it, and we're going to do several stops. We're going to go maybe from 20 miles an hour to 0, from 30 miles an hour to 0, from 40 to 0. We're going to do several stops from about 55, 60, or the speed limit or so, to 0, and that's going to basically bed in this brake pad, which is brand new, to our brand new rotor surface because it was just resurfaced, and make sure there's no smoking and all that stuff is burned off. Now hopefully there should be minimal, if any, greasy, nasty fingerprints. I didn't wear gloves either, but if there's none of that, there should be minimal smoking. By the time 5 or 10 miles is on, it's ready to release to the customer.